Hey everybody, and welcome to the Expert Witness Show. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into expert witness work and how I almost quit a job that I love. See, for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a mechanical engineer. Even in kindergarten, when my friends wanted to be firemen, astronauts, or cowboys, growing up to be an engineer was always what I wanted to do. But what is it that makes somebody want to be an engineer? Is it nature or is it nurture? For me, I think it was both. On the nature side, I've always been mechanically inclined, building and taking apart, creating something where nothing existed before, no doubt causing my mother significant frustration. I always excelled in math and science courses through my education. It all made sense, it was easy. And although I studied hard and never skipped an assignment, it always felt like I didn't have to work as hard as some of the other students in the class. On the nurture side, I'm a third generation mechanical engineer. My grandpa started his company in the late 70s, a few years before I was born. My dad started working with him shortly thereafter. Their office was minutes from our house where I grew up, and I spent quite a bit of time there. And this was back in the days when the engineering office was full of drafting tables, bleh, rulers, scales, and compasses. My favorite tool was the electric eraser, either that or the fly swatting gun that had a target on it about this big and was spring loaded so you could actually shoot that target at the fly. Those are my two favorite toys in the office. Um, but with the eraser, you pressed a button and it would start to spin, and you could erase a really long line really easy. Uh, Piece of cake. So things like in the 5th grade, I built a hydraulic arm controlled by a joystick for the science fair. In high school, I passed AP Calculus, AP Physics, AP Chemistry, and along with the drafting class that taught me how to write in all caps. They required me to fill out an entire 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 1/8 by 1/8 inch blocks and write the alphabet over and over and over, filling up every block with perfectly formed capital letters every week. And if you want to know why engineers write in all caps, that's probably why. So, starting college, I was still eager to become a mechanical engineer. I loved learning how things work and how to take an idea and to turn it into something real. I never wondered what my major should be. I never switched majors. It was from the day I started till the day I graduated, always mechanical engineering. I wanted to be able to help people make things that made their life easier, made their lives better. For me, the coursework continued to come pretty easily. I worked tirelessly, and I graduated cum laude in only 7 semesters, which, if you ask most people, a mechanical engineering degree typically takes 9 or 10. So I made the decision to go to graduate school, partially because I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to work, and partially because the payoff for a master's degree in mechanical engineering is, the break even is like 5 years, something ridiculous like that. The pay difference between a bachelor's and master's degree is significant. So I made the decision to go, and I applied to combined programs that offered an MS in mechanical engineering and an MBA. My friends in the engineering program wondered, and they asked why someone that is good at engineering would go into business, almost like I was a defector to the cause of engineering. But I viewed it differently. I recognize that there's more to product development than just engineering. It all ties together. Plus, I always imagined running my own business someday, so I thought it was a good decision. So during college and after several internships and multiple job interviews, I started working with Alpine Engineering and Design, mostly because none of the positions at the other companies seemed nearly as fun or as engaging. For the first 5 years, most of the work I was doing was strictly engineering: CAD drawings, finite element analysis, product development, building and testing prototypes, creating production drawings for things that were ready to be manufactured. I worked on all sorts of projects, although most were mobile equipment, things mounted to wheels, garbage trucks, aerial lifts, dump trucks, trailers, cranes, oil and gas equipment, all sorts of things like that. And I came to an interesting situation, so I came into an interesting situation at Alpine Engineering and Design because some of the other employees were already doing expert witness work when I started. So there was a familiarity with the concept and the process as I was doing some of the engineering work. I would hear people talking about it around the office, and gradually I started helping some of the other experts with research, with testing and report writing for the cases they were working on. That while continuing to work on other engineering projects. Now eventually, this is how I ended up with my first case. Eventually Alpine Engineering got a call from an attorney that needed a report on a pretty short timeline, less than 2 weeks if I recall. And the other experts at our company wouldn't have been able to meet that deadline because sometimes we get pretty busy. But they suggested that I would be capable of handling the case. And after talking with the attorneys, I was retained and got right to work. This particular case was a patent case, and I submitted a first report and a rebuttal of the other expert side's report. And a few months later, I was subpoenaed for a deposition. Now, the deposition took place in a small conference room not far from Salt Lake City, not far from the airport in Salt Lake City. And I sat there waiting for the deposition to start. I was watching the airplanes taking off and landing out the window, trying to calm my nerves. I was pretty nervous. I was told that the attorney taking my deposition was new and that this would be her first deposition, at least for patent cases. She must have been trying to make a name for herself or trying to prove something. As the deposition started, it quickly became apparent that the other side had very few, if any, legitimate arguments in the case and reverted to the strategy of trying to discredit me and my opinions. The questions were persistent and many were degrading, specifically formulated to make me look and possibly feel unqualified to provide expert opinions. They asked things like, how could I possibly be an expert when I had written the report when I was only 29 years old? And they pointed out that I look especially young for my age, something that I'm obviously well aware of. They insinuated that I had only achieved so much because of nepotism, and that I was really just a backup or helper at the company, rather than someone with real expertise, which was not at all the case. They asked me very basic patent law questions like, what does 102 mean, and what's the difference between 102 and 103? They probably weren't very pleased when I answered them easily and correctly. In effect, they spent several hours trying to belittle me, my credentials, and my experience in order to try and get me kicked off the case. I answered all the questions, but I felt completely pummeled at the end. My confidence was crushed. I'd imagined saying something at the end of my first deposition like, hey, thanks for taking it easy on my first case. But after it was over, it just didn't seem like a true statement, and I couldn't bring myself to say it. I started rehashing the questions and how I might have answered them almost instantly, wondering what the best responses would have been. On the way out, and just having witnessed this verbal beating and likely sensing my mood, the attorney I was working with said, well, it's only going to get better from here. That was by far the most hostile deposition I've ever been a part of. The kind words that didn't hit home for me until much later. I didn't sleep at all that night, and hardly at all for the next 2 weeks. Scenes, questions, and accusations from the deposition kept ringing in my mind. I was ineffective at work and at home. My wife was starting to get really worried about me. I started to ask myself, was this really something that was going to be part of my job description moving forward? Was this really the job that I still wanted to have? It's not like I didn't have a lot of options. There's always need for good engineers. Something that had been the most fun and enjoyable job that I could imagine had in one day turned into one that I began to dread. I didn't want to be deposed again. I didn't want to have people attacking me. And I started sending out resumes, and I even had a couple of interviews within the month after that deposition. I was on the outside of the guardrail, ready to jump ship, but I didn't. It turns out that that deposition actually went really well, despite how I felt afterwards, and the case settled shortly thereafter. Although the terms were confidential, I understand that the party we were working with was very pleased with the outcome. This particular case seemed like the industry giant was trying to take out a new startup, not because they had any legitimate infringement contentions and thought that they would win. Rather, it seemed that they were hoping that the legal fees would cause the startup to go out of business. Since the settlement, the startup has experienced tremendous growth and has revolutionized an entire industry, something that would never have happened if they would have been put out of business when the company was in its infancy. In a way, I feel like I was part of that, or at least I was part of allowing that to happen. So now I recognize that I do get to make a difference, both through the engineering and through the expert witness work. My knowledge, education, and experience can make a difference in the cases that I work on, in the world, and certainly in the lives of the people involved in those cases. Sometimes there are cases that I won't work on because I don't agree with what's being argued. And so why do I do this type of work, even though it's less exciting and less stimulating than what I would call hardcore engineering work? I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist and scientist, said it best. He said, "What I do is driven by a sense of duty, because I can do something, and if I can do it better than others, and it's for the greater good of society, I would be irresponsible if I did not." And that describes pretty well how I feel about expert witness work. There's a sense of duty because there are things that I know and that I can explain that others either can't or have chosen to ignore. And by explaining that, it does make a difference in society and in the lives of people and in the lives of companies. So that is how I got into expert witness work. That's how I almost quit the job that I love. And that's how and now I continue to do both the engineering and the expert witness work as it's needed, as I continue to work with Alpine Engineering and Design. So I hope that you like that story. In the future, we'll be talking about different cases and different applications, different principles that I have come across and that we have worked with in different expert witness cases, and talk about how we go about showing and proving different theories to the jury and to all the people involved. So thank you, and take care.